Now, we had some breaking news earlier on today's show, not long after we came on air, actually, about, 4:10? talkSPORT understands Newcastle are now free to sign players on loan from the Saudi Pro League in January after the Premier League clubs voted against introducing a ban at a shareholders' meeting today. The vote on bringing in a new rule to stop clubs loaning players from teams with the same owners failed to attract the 14 votes required to pass the resolution. It means Newcastle would now be able to sign players like Ruben Neves from Al Hilal, who, like the Magpies, are owned by the Saudi Arabia Public Investment Fund, the PIF. Let's get more on this now with talkSPORT's chief football correspondent, Alex Crook. Crookie, hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, how are we?
I'm good, I'm very well, man. How are you? You well?
I'm good. I've got a bit of a sore throat today, so I apologise if the voice is not quite up to standard.
Have you had Manuka honey?
I haven't. Would you recommend it?
Yes, opera singers use it. I'm not suggesting you've got that kind of voice of an angel, voice of a potty mouth, but either way, it should work. It's quite expensive, but get yourself off to Holland and Barrett, you'll get some. Listen, were you surprised by the outcome of this vote or not?
A little bit, but I guess the slender nature of the vote, we understand that 13 clubs voted in favour of rushing through this resolution to introduce a ban in January from teams loaning players from clubs under the same ownership. 7 clubs voted against it, and that's crucial because if you get 14 votes in favour, 6 against, then the resolution would have been passed. So that's how narrow the margin was. Obviously, there's going to be speculation about which clubs voted in favour, but take your pick, really, because obviously a lot of focus is on Newcastle. I think if anybody is going to raid Saudi Arabia, for example, in January to try and sign loan players, it would be Newcastle because we know all about their issues with injury and with Sandro Tonali, obviously banned until next August. But up to half of the clubs, half of the clubs in the Premier League do have the same multi-ownership structure as Newcastle. It's just maybe not as publicised. You look at Brighton, for example, where I am down on the south coast, that they're owned or they're in partnership with Union Saint-Galois. In Belgium, obviously, you've got the City ownership group. Manchester City used their links with New York City to sign Frank Lampard on loan back in the day that maybe a lot of people forget about. Aston Villa have got ties with Vitória in Portugal as well. So while this affects Newcastle probably more immediately than anybody else, it isn't just Newcastle who would have found themselves at a disadvantage if this ban had been introduced.
Crook, is there any whispers into what clubs voted for it and what clubs voted against it?
No, not at the moment. We haven't heard anything official from the Premier League. This is just from speaking to my sources in terms of how the vote panned out. Again, I guess the obvious assumption, if you've got 7 clubs who are voting against something, it would be the big 6 and Newcastle, but that might be a little bit too simplistic because I've already mentioned there's a lot of clubs that this would affect. I'm sure we'll get more details in the fullness of time. And they can vote again as well. Obviously, it was the shareholders' meeting today. They have those on a regular basis. This was to introduce a ban for the January transfer window. The fact the vote was so narrow in terms of not introducing that ban, you do wonder if they may revisit it ahead of the summer transfer window. So we may not have heard the last of it.
I'll tell you what is interesting, Crook. How will this affect the financial fair play? Does this mean that owners can manufacture deals between clubs they own to satisfy fair play restrictions?
Well, this is a fascinating question. And obviously, as someone who deals a lot in the transfer market, what you get now publicly are a lot of undisclosed transfer fees, and you don't actually find out the true amount of a transfer until clubs submit their accounts to Companies House. And often that can happen a long time after that transaction has gone through. But you're right to be sceptical because what is stopping a club in the Premier League, if they do have links with a club in a foreign league, if they need to raise money to balance the books, from inflating a transfer fee? Now, obviously, if they were found to be doing that, there'd be serious repercussions from the Premier League. And I think in the case of Newcastle, for example, they're so keen because of the added scrutiny they're under to be seen to be squeaky clean. I don't think they would risk it, but I think it's a really valid point that you raised.
But if, for argument's sake, because there's no financial fair play in Saudi Arabia, right, in the Saudi Pro League, so if, for argument's sake, they wanted to sign Bruno Guimaraes, they could table a bid of £130 million to buy him, couldn't they?
Yeah, but that probably wouldn't be an unreasonable price.
All right, okay.
100,
but 160, but you understand my point. They could literally go in for a crazy amount of money above and beyond what he should really go for. And not just Newcastle, I mean any club that find themselves in this situation.
Yeah, I think you're right. We shouldn't just make an example of Newcastle because, as I say, there's so many clubs who can benefit or not benefit from this ban being introduced. But as you say, it's a brilliant question. I think it'd be more pertinent if somebody paid 130 million quid for someone like Paul Dummett, because obviously Bruno Guimaraes is a top player. Obviously, they sold Alan Saint-Maximin to Saudi Arabia, and actually eyebrows were raised then about the fact that he was probably sold for less than market value. I think it was about 25 million quid, maybe less than that in the end, that Saint-Maximin changed hands for. And maybe that's an example of where Newcastle don't want to be seen to try and use the system to their advantage.
Crook, the teams that have got this kind of link between themselves and other clubs, do you think that gives them an unfair advantage, do you believe?
Well, I think it's going to be more commonplace. Even Bournemouth, they've just announced that there's going to be a club that are going to be starting up in Auckland under Bill Foley's group, that they've got a club in France already under their stable. So I think eventually probably all 20 Premier League clubs will have a similar multi-ownership system. It's a way of helping to develop players. Brighton have done it to quite good effect in terms of loaning players out to Union Saint-Gallois, and then when they're ready, bringing them back to the Premier League. So, yeah, I think there is that advantage for clubs, but I think you're going to find it's going to be fairly commonplace and fairly widespread in the not-too-distant future.
Crookie, listen, thank you for coming on. I never thought I'd say this to you live on the radio, but what are you wearing? Looks like you've got a boiler suit on.
It's a shacket.
Oh, don't get Bentley started on the shacket.
But Crookie, we can see you're wearing a shacket, but you've got a T-shirt underneath it, right? Correct?
You're not supposed to do that, no?
No, you are supposed to do it, but Andy wears a shacket with nothing underneath.
Let me ask you, Crookie, if you were wearing the shacket but didn't have it open at the top, would you have a T-shirt on?
It's a good question, because I'm quite hot. Probably not, you know.
There you go.
So you're proud of that, yeah? You've got the same fashion things as Crookie.
Oh, yes. Always wear that T-shirt, Crookie. You're proud of that. I don't know if that's an insult to me or you, yeah.
Well, listen, Crookie usually comes on and he gives me a little dig all the time.
Both of us. Crookie, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for coming on talking about that so soon after that news had broke. Good work, as always.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, man. There you go, wonderful Alex. Just a quick word from you about that. Are you surprised the clubs voted to allow that to continue?
Well, yeah, I'm guessing a lot of the clubs that voted against it don't maybe have this link, and the ones that do have in favour. But
or they think there's going to be a link in the future.
I do think I understand that. But loaning players back from clubs that under the same umbrella, are they going to make your squad stronger? Potentially, the players, if you've let them go in the first place, maybe. I guess it all depends on what players they can manage to bring back. Like if Newcastle do get, and again, Ruben Neves, good signing, really good signing. Do you know what I mean? But there's other players there that even if they've got injuries, they're not necessarily going to make your squad any better, are they? It's not like you're going to be able to loan like Ronaldo, are you?
No.
You know what I'm saying? So it's one of them.
talkSPORT Drive. Super opinionated sporting debate. Monday to Friday afternoon from 4 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.